I wasn't looking for anything that day. I was cleaning out her car because she said she'd spilled coffee on the seat. She was still asleep upstairs, and I thought I'd surprise her by detailing it before work. But when I reached under the passenger seat, my hand touched something cold, the corner of a phone case. I pulled it out, wiped off a layer of dust, and froze. It was her old phone. The one she said she lost a month ago. The one I replaced without a single question. The pastel pink case was scratched, but the small crack on the corner, I remembered that. She dropped it on the balcony once, laughed about being clumsy. At least it still works, she said back then, pressing it to her chest like it was a lucky charm. Now it lay in my hand like a loaded gun. At first, I told myself it didn't mean anything. Maybe she found it later, forgot to tell me. Maybe she kept it for photos or contacts. Maybe. But then I noticed the charger tucked under the seat, connected to the auxiliary outlet. The battery icon glowed faintly. The phone wasn't dead. It had been charging recently. And that's when something inside me shifted. I sat in the car for a long minute, staring at the locked screen. Her face smiled back at me from the wallpaper, the same photo I took on our anniversary. For a second, I almost laughed, because it felt too cliché. The lost phone lie, the suspicious distance, the soft excuses. I'd seen this story play out 1,000 times online. But never imagined it could be me. I tried her passcode, but it didn't work. Then I remembered, it might still have my fingerprint saved. It did. The screen unlocked instantly. My hands shook. Not from anger. From dread. The first thing I saw was a Telegram notification. A heart emoji from a contact saved under the name L. No last name. Just that. I tapped it. My chest tightened as the messages rolled upward, weeks of chats, long paragraphs, photos. None of me. All of him. Can't stop thinking about last night. I wish you'd tell him already. You know I'd treat you better. She'd replied with photos, hotel mirror selfies, nothing explicit but intimate enough to erase any hope that this was innocent. I put the phone down, but the car felt smaller, heavier. My brain tried to assemble reasons, explanations, some logical version where this wasn't what it clearly was. But logic drowned under the weight of every message. Every baby and miss you. Every lie she'd told me while pretending to want the same life I did. We'd been trying for a baby. Or at least I thought we were. The pills confirmed otherwise. I saw them when I went back inside, a small blister pack tucked halfway out of her purse on the table. I'd seen her take vitamins before, so I never paid attention. But these weren't vitamins. I picked them up, turned the label toward the light. Oral contraceptives. I dropped them like they burned me. She walked into the room right then, wearing my t-shirt, hair messy from sleep. Smiling. Stretching. Looking at me with those same eyes that used to make everything feel right in the world. "What's wrong?" she asked. I didn't answer. I just held up the phone. For a moment, she didn't react, as if her brain needed time to reload the lies she'd planned for this. Then her face went pale, and her eyes flickered, first to the phone, then to my expression, then to the purse on the table. She didn't cry. Didn't scream. Didn't even reach for the phone. She just whispered, "You weren't supposed to find that." Something in me snapped. Not loud. Not violent. Just a quiet break. I walked past her and put the phone on the counter. "When were you going to tell me?" I asked, my voice calm, too calm. She started stammering, some mixture of excuses and half-truths. Something about how she didn't want to hurt me, how things got complicated, how she wasn't sure what she wanted. That last line hit like a knife. I left the house without another word. Driving nowhere, I replayed every conversation we'd had in the last few months, every time she said she was tired, or needed a break, or wanted to focus on herself. All the subtle ways she'd been preparing her exit while I planned our future. And I realized something, I didn't even hate her. Not yet. Hate would come later. After the numbness wore off. After the shock turned into clarity. Right now, I was calm. Cold. Because if she had lied about something as sacred as creating a life together, she deserved something more than anger. She deserved consequences. I looked at the phone again, resting on the seat beside me. It wasn't just evidence, it was a roadmap to the truth. Every chat, every photo, every secret she thought was buried. And for the first time that day, I didn't feel broken. I felt focused. Because while she'd been planning a life without me, I was about to plan her downfall. The thing about discovery is that it gives you an unfair advantage, you already know the punchline. Everyone else is still improvising. That first night, I didn't call her, didn't accuse her, didn't smash anything. I did the opposite, I became invisible. The phone was a map. Names. Timestamps. Photos with geotags. Little details she trusted herself with because she thought no one would ever find them. I reopened the chats, scrolling slowly like a man reading a confession aloud. L became Leon when he sent a selfie with his work badge. A nickname here, a private joke there, and suddenly the pieces fit together. He worked in the same building as her. Same floor. Same hours. Same exit she took when she had to run an errand. All the messages had timestamps that matched days she'd told me she was late at the office. Little code words, coffee after shift, lunch run, that suddenly read like appointments on a calendar. I made copies. Screenshots, backups, printed receipts. Old-fashioned, tactile proof. I synced the phone to my laptop and exported the chat history. I labeled folders, dates, photos, payments. I annotated them with short notes, not emotional ones, clinical, almost surgical. March 12th, hotel receipt 2:14 a.m. April 3rd, delivery photo with porch light. I wanted an archive I could hold up to anyone and say, this is not fiction. During the day I watched. At first from a distance. Coffee shops. The bus stop near her office. I learned her patterns faster than she could change them. She took a new route in the mornings, left a little earlier, came home smelling faintly of someone else's cologne. The world I thought I knew shifted, and I catalogued every inch of it. I didn't follow her like a lunatic. I followed like a surgeon, precise, necessary. I watched her meet Leon once, in the back of a small cafe that smelled of burnt espresso and cheap pastries. They hugged like lovers who'd rehearsed their intimacy. He kissed her cheek, whispered something that made her laugh, and when she turned, she didn't see me. I watched until the color drained from her face when a delivery boy bumped her with a stack of envelopes. She clutched at them like a woman startled awake. There were practicalities. Joint accounts. Shared subscriptions. A lease with both our names on it. I made notes, what could be moved, what could be frozen, what could be taken as leverage. I made calls to lawyers not to file, but to ask the kinds of questions that reveal vulnerability. How long to file for separation, how to prove infidelity if it became necessary, what witnesses count. I wanted options, I didn't want surprises. At night, I lay awake inventorying every conversation we'd ever had about kids, her enthusiasm when she picked names, the ultrasound appointments we'd jokingly scheduled, the way she'd press her palm to my chest and say, "We're ready." That image became a blade I carried carefully. If she could say those things and mean nothing, then she'd already been using me as scenery in someone else's story. I needed leverage that couldn't be dismissed as anger. So I built a paper trail. I bought a cheap voicemail recorder and set it on the kitchen counter with the volume low. Conversations in our house were just as revealing as texts. People slip. They say things aloud they wouldn't in writing. If she called Leon while I was out, I wanted a record. If she arranged a meet, I wanted a time and place I could confirm with a photograph. I also fed myself small, honest lies. I told coworkers I had a family emergency. I told friends I needed space. Anything that kept me invisible. I pretended to be broken because broken men are easy to underestimate. She took me at my face value. She resumed her role without suspicion, planning brunches, speaking about names, smiling soft at me in the mornings like nothing had ruptured. One afternoon, a message caught my eye that changed the game. Leon sent a photo of a small house on the outskirts, a rental listing with a porch and a sagging fence. He joked, "Imagine us here." She replied with 3 hearts. The listing had an address. I visited the property that weekend in a borrowed jacket and watched from the opposite curb. A man left the house with a grocery bag, a woman came out to the car and kissed him on the mouth in front of his neighbor. It wasn't an apartment. It was a second life. I photographed them. From a distance. Discreetly. The neighbor waved, the woman waved back like someone who had no idea the world she inhabited was a stage. The photos went into the evidence folder. I started sending anonymous messages to the other man's girlfriend, not the angry kind. Not yet, simple, clinical screenshots. Is this what you're looking for? I wanted to see how the dominoes fell when someone else held a tile. The girlfriend's silence said more than a confession. She called Leon. He denied. He yelled. Their argument leaked across a thin wall of texts. Later that night, I saw a photo from Leon. "We need to talk." He was sweating. Vulnerable. The perfect time to step back and let their own secrets unfold. Meanwhile, I started moving accounts. Little things at first. I removed my card from joint subscriptions, closed a credit line we rarely used, moved emergency funds into an account only I could reach. Not vindictive. Preemptive. I wasn't trying to trap her, I was building room to breathe if I had to leave. Each piece of evidence layered over the last, until the phone that had felt like a loaded gun the day I found it became an indictment. The more I learned, the less I felt like a man betrayed and more like a man assembling a case. Revenge is not always noise and fury. Sometimes it's quiet patience and the discipline to let truth do the heavy lifting. I built timelines, printed photos, and folded receipts into an envelope. I rehearsed nothing out loud. I told no one how far I intended to go. Because once you let the world in on your plan, it becomes someone else's story. At the end of the week, when she came home with flowers and the same tired smile, I greeted her at the door like a man who had slept and now woke. She kissed me, and for a moment I let her think she'd gotten away with it. Then I took her hand and said, softly, "We need to talk." She said okay. Her smile faltered. There was a note of fear under the practiced calm. That small noise, the first crack in her composure, tasted like victory. I already knew how the conversation would go. I already had the proof. What I still needed was the timing. The right moment to pull the thread so the whole thing unraveled spectacularly. Because revenge, I had decided, would be precise and absolute. When I told her we needed to talk, she expected the usual script, a quiet apology, a promise to do better, the soft bargaining that happens when two people decide it's easier to pretend than to break. She set the kettle on, paced, smoothed her hair like a woman rehearsing grief. She sat at the table with those hands that always found mine without asking. We both knew what the talk would be about, but she waited for me to make the move. Maybe she believed if she looked remorseful enough, the truth could be softened into something forgivable. I laid the envelope on the table between us and watched her face change as if I'd turned the lights off. Inside were photos, screenshots, receipts, the archive I'd built week by week. I didn't push it toward her. I let its presence do the work. "Where did you get this?" she asked, voice brittle. "From your phone," I said. "The one you said you lost." Her mouth opened like someone surprised by cold water. I found it," she stammered. "I kept it because you were hiding things," I finished for her. The sentence left my mouth quiet and sharp. It fit, it was simple and true. She reached for the envelope like a hand reaching for a lifeline. I didn't stop her. She pulled out the hotel receipts and dropped them back on the table as if they had burned her fingers. She looked at me then, really looked, as if she were searching for the man she'd once trusted. "You don't understand," she said. "It wasn't like that." I let her talk. People fill silence with explanations when their stories are thin. She told me about loneliness, about excitement, about a mistake that turned into more. She used the kind of language that tries to make betrayal sound small. "It happened, it was wrong, I'm sorry." She looked at me with those same eyes that had once promised a different life. When she reached out to touch my arm I flinched. "Don't," I said. She recoiled like I'd slapped her, then gathered herself. "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered. You meant to hide it," I said. "That's the problem." She started to cry then, real tears that wet the table. My chest tightened, but I didn't move. The tears were not for me, they were for the person she wanted me to be. She wanted forgiveness because forgiveness keeps life convenient. "You could have told me," I said. "We agreed on this. We planned." "We planned," she scoffed, wiping her face with a trembling hand. "We planned? You planned. You were the one making lists and picking names. I didn't know if I was ready. I didn't know if I wanted to change everything for you." The confession was short and ugly. I had expected excuses, but not this bluntness. It was as if she had been rehearsing the truth in private and finally dropped it like a stone she'd carried too long. "Who is he?" I asked. "Leon," she said. He's just someone I connected with. It wasn't about love." I laughed once, a hollow sound that surprised both of us. "Not about love?" I repeated. "Then what was it about?" She searched for answers and found none that sounded honest. "I don't know," she said. "Attention. Freedom." I felt alive. She said the last word like it was a sin she'd been unable to resist. The confession was a knife. The way she spoke made it clear she wasn't asking for forgiveness, she was explaining a choice she'd already made. I pushed the phone across the table and turned it so the messages were visible between us like murder evidence. She watched them blaze across the screen, eyes wide. For the first time, the room filled with the small truths of other people's voices, hotel bookings, late-night plans, messages typed and deleted. "You want to know why I stayed?" she asked suddenly, voice low. "Because you made the future sound so easy. You sold me a life, and I thought I could have both. You could have told me you were unsure," I said. "We could have delayed. We could have. You would have convinced me," she cut in. "You would have wrapped me in the same dream until I believed it was the only one. I needed something that wasn't shaped by you." She was earnest in a way that made me understand how little I had seen, the distance she'd felt, the quiet revolt that had grown into something else. It didn't excuse her. It didn't make the pills or the photos vanish. But it explained the architecture of her lying, how it had been built from small choices that stacked into betrayal. I noticed then the small things people miss when they look for drama, the way the light hit the USB charger where she hid the phone, the faint scent of his cologne under her coat, the receipts folded into the glove compartment. These were not dramatic, they were domestic. That was the cruelty of it, betrayal folded into ordinary gestures. Why didn't you leave sooner? I asked. I was scared, she admitted. Scared of losing you, of losing stability. I didn't know how to be alone. There it was, fear strung like a confession. She had wanted escape and safety at once, and that is a selfish architecture that inevitably collapses. I thought of the life I'd imagined, late-night feedings, a tiny hand wrapped around my finger, the sound of a name we'd chosen echoing in a small room. The image crashed against the photos on the table until the shape of what I'd lost became ugly and obvious. You can go, I said finally. Or we can try to fix it. But if you choose to stay, you have to understand something. I paused. I won't be the same man who forgives without proof. I let the words hang there like a verdict. She clutched the chair and stared at me. Please, she whispered. Please don't throw everything away. My answer was not an outburst. It was a plan. I told her, plainly, that I needed time. That I would think about what came next. That she should stay elsewhere while I sorted things out. The words were practical, cold. I wasn't asking her to leave in a fury, I was giving her space to live with what she'd done. When she reached for me again, I stepped back. Pack a bag, I said. Stay with your sister. Don't tell Leon. Don't call him. Her face fell. Why should I listen to you? Because right now, I said, I'm the one who knows the full story. She nodded, defeated. She moved like someone who'd been reduced to the smallest of self-preservation options. I watched her pack, clothes, the little trinkets that made our house feel less foreign. She moved mechanically, as if the choreography of leaving had been rehearsed before. As she left the door, she turned once and said, almost as if reading from a script, I'm sorry. That apology would be part of the evidence I filed away. It would be one of the pieces I used to show not that she'd loved and failed, but that she'd chosen to conceal. Outside, she hesitated on the step and looked back. The look she gave me had everything, fear, shame, a strange pleading. I met it with blankness. When the door closed, I didn't follow. I turned the key in the lock and sat at the table with the envelope between my hands. The proof lay like a mallet. I felt neither triumph nor relief, only the steady click of a plan tightening into place. Revenge had to be surgical. Not a spectacle of anger but a dismantling of the structure she'd built. She'd hidden a life. I would reveal it, to the people who mattered, to those whose judgment would sting the most. Family. Friends. The other man's circle. The landlord. I would not spill everything at once. I would time it like a collapse, gradual, undeniable, catastrophic. The hardest part wasn't the evidence. It was watching the door close on the life we had promised each other and realizing that the thing I'd wanted most, the baby, the future, had been stripped from the room not by force but by choice. I folded the hotel receipt and slid it back into the envelope. The next move would have to be perfect. Revenge, I decided, would not be a scene. It would be a series of small, tidy avalanches, each one unstoppable once started. There would be no shouting in public, no smashed plates, no dramatic confrontations on camera. She had built her second life out of quiet things, I would dismantle it the same way. First, practicalities. I met a lawyer in the morning under the pretense of discussing estate planning. The man I hired was not a vengeful type, he was efficient and smiled only when paperwork was in order. We transferred utilities and removed her name from accounts she didn't deserve to touch. I moved emergency funds into a separate account, I placed temporary holds where I could. I didn't take money out of spite, I created boundaries so that if she chose the second life, she would have to build it without mine to lean on. Then I used the phone like a scalpel. I drafted succinct messages, no venom, only facts, and sent them to the people who mattered most in her orbit, her sister, our parents, the handful of close friends who still thought we were a team. Screenshots accompanied every message, dates, receipts, the hotel chains where they met. I didn't scream the details. I let the images speak. A photo of a receipt says more than 1,000 excuses. The first response was disbelief from her sister. Then silence. Then a string of short, stunned replies that turned into a call I ignored. Our parents called long and loud, voices full of shock and questions I knew the answers to. They asked me to explain, to forgive, to fix. I gave them the archive. I told them nothing else. It was not my job to smooth their hurt. It was my job to show them the truth and let them decide what to do with it. Next, the other dominoes. I messaged Leon's girlfriend, but not with accusations. I sent her only a single photo with a location and a date. I signed it anonymously. People respond to the truth when it is undeniable, they respond even faster when it lands in their hands without commentary. She called him. They argued. He turned on his charm and denial. His messages to me were desperate and stupid, I didn't know, I swear, she lied to me too. I saved them all. I delivered the final and most public proof at a time that mattered, the family dinner celebrating my mother's birthday, a gathering she'd expected to be safe. I walked in with an envelope, sat across from her, and slid it to our parents. No theatrics. No raised voice. Just the paper. I watched their faces fold with the slow recognition of betrayal. My mother's hands trembled, my father's jaw clenched. People at the table noticed. Conversation dried up like paint in sun. Word moved faster than I expected. A cousin called later that evening and asked if the rumors were true. A neighbor stopped mowing his lawn and stared at our house differently. The house that had felt private now existed in a public space of questions. That was part of the plan. Consequences aren't punishment unless they wound where the liar lives, in reputation, in the small assumptions people make about trust. I could have involved the police, but infidelity isn't a crime. What I could do, and what I did, was control the narrative. I threaded facts into the pattern of her life like beads into a necklace, receipts, messages, witnesses. I took care not to humiliate beyond what was true. Revenge is strongest when it's proportionate and surgical. Cruelty cheapens the victory. The other man's life imploded in private. His girlfriend confronted him with the proof. He tried to lie, then to apologize, then to vanish. Within a week, his reputation at work frayed. People who had once laughed with him in the break room gave him shorter answers. A whisper here, a withheld invitation there. He grew smaller under the same fluorescent lights he'd once dominated. I didn't celebrate his downfall. I observed it, took note, and filed it away. She lost more than I'd expected. Her sister stopped answering calls. Friends who used to host weekends in the countryside began sending messages about being busy. The landlord, a practical man who liked neat records, asked to meet and, after we talked, served a notice to vacate for breach of quiet enjoyment. Having another, undeclared occupant in a rented unit was a risk he didn't want. The house with the sagging fence emptied within a month. Movers came and went, and I sat across the street under a tree and photographed the slow unbuilding of a life that had been built on false foundations. There were nights I felt ugly for what I'd done. It's a strange thing to plan a downfall and then sit across from it while it happens. I remembered the morning she had smiled and the way she'd traced future names on a foggy window. But those memories had been threaded through deceit, and once I peeled one layer back, the picture underneath was different, self-preserving, cowardly, a choice made in the privacy of a purse. In the end, the cleanest moment came not from exposing her but from stepping away. The law had its forms, family had their judgments, reputations did what reputations do. I signed the papers that gave me the space to leave the house within a month on my own terms. I consolidated what I wanted, divided what I needed, and kept the things that mattered, my dignity, and a small envelope of receipts that would prove the truth if anyone ever doubted me. She moved out with a few boxes and the weight of her choices. I watched from the driveway as a taxi pulled away. She looked at me as if expecting a grand finale, tears, pleading, a last-minute confession that might change everything. She said nothing. The taxi merged into traffic, and she was gone. Afterward, people offered sympathy in the clipped way adults do, platitudes, dinners, a cousin dropping off a casserole. My phone filled with messages from friends who said they were there for me. I accepted the meals and the company because loneliness is practical after betrayal. But the real thing I noticed, days later, was the quiet. I woke up one morning and realized my shoulders were down. The world hadn't fixed itself, and she hadn't been punished into ruin beyond reasonable consequence. But the weight that had lived inside my chest since the phone had slipped into my hand was lighter. It wasn't joy. It was not even relief. It was peace, the steady kind that comes when a storm passes and the sky, abruptly, is the same color as it was before. Revenge had not returned what I lost. It hadn't brought the baby I'd imagined or the late-night laughter of a family. But watching her life unspool, not with spectacle, but with precise, undeniable truth, had made something else possible. It gave me the space to think beyond the hurt. As the weeks folded into months, I found myself planning again, but this time for myself. Not for a future with her, but for a life uncluttered by secrets. Sometimes revenge is not about making someone suffer. Sometimes it's about reclaiming the part of your life they tried to steal. I closed the folder of evidence and put it in a drawer. It was a small, ordinary movement, and it felt like closing a door. Outside, a child laughed from a passing stroller. It was a sound I once wanted to hear in my own house. I let it pass by, and for the first time since the phone in the car, I didn't flinch.